Welcome to the Dibley Diaries for the first Sunday of Christmas. This week we're going to be thinking about families, and we're going to be thinking in Thought of the Week about the story where Jesus stayed behind in the temple because he said it was his father's house, and Mary and Joseph have been looking for him. And it's led me thinking about families who believe that your village church is their family church. And I may be considered a bit of a whinger about this, and I may have talked about this before, but I just was really thinking about it this week, that what a challenge it is. So there are quite a few families that I know attached to all of the village churches where I've ever worked. They don't live in the village anymore. They may not have lived in the village for 1 or 2 generations, but they believe that this is their village church. They usually don't go to church where they live, so they're not part of any church community. They don't come to any services, no church services, no church community gatherings, but they believe that the building is their village church. And this can make them very demanding, especially to do with baptisms and weddings and funerals. Just after the COVID lockdown had lifted, I had a situation in one of my villages where we had left part of the churchyard to grow for wildflowers, but the other part of the churchyard, which we would normally mow, we had been specifically instructed not to mow. And 30 hours after the lockdown had lifted, I got the most strong email from someone who'd come to visit a grave in the churchyard, really having a really strong go at me about the fact that the churchyard wasn't mown. And I phoned her up and talked to her about it and said, we haven't been able to mow the churchyard because we were specifically told not to. It's run by a team of volunteers, and I'm very happy to meet you in the churchyard, and we can talk about which areas are going to be wildflower areas and which areas are going to be mown now that the lockdown has been lifted. But she wasn't having any. She didn't want to engage in the church community in any way at all. She just wanted to know why her village church was not being kept properly. And that's a real challenge for us as church communities. How do we integrate these people who believe that they're part of our church, or the church building is their church and it belongs to them? How do we actually integrate them into our worshipping community, or into a worshipping community nearer where they live? Thought for the week this week is based on Luke 2:41 to 52, which is the reading for the first Sunday of Christmas, and it's the story of Jesus going missing after the trip to the Passover. So he and Mary and Joseph, their family, all go on a trip to the temple for the Passover. Then they think they've gathered everybody from Jerusalem and they head off back. At some point, they realise that Jesus isn't with them. And then they head back to Jerusalem, and then they can't find Jesus anywhere. And in the end, they find Jesus in the temple. And Jesus says, why were you looking for me anywhere other than here? Because you know I need to be in my Father's house. And then Jesus goes back home with them, and is a good boy, and it's a really intriguing story. So Jesus is in a complicated family, and we all live in complicated families, and I've been thinking about it. Well, it's actually much more complicated for Jesus than simply Jesus had a mum and 2 dads. And I wonder what they talked to Jesus about. Did they say anything? Did they have language to talk about kind of Joseph not being Jesus' biological father? Did they talk about the Christmas stories with him? Did they talk about the angels? Did they talk about any of this with him? Because What did Jesus know as he was growing up? I mean, Jesus is 12, about to become a teenager, and we know that teenagers are always right. While they're teenagers, they know everything and they're always right. And Jesus is just in that position in his life where he's in that development where he's like, of course I'm going to be here in the temple because it's my Father's house. That's absolutely what is going to be the case. But then he goes home and he is obedient, and then he grows up, and I guess he learns to work with wood, and he does all these things, and he settles down again. Did he know? Did he always know about Jesus, about his father, about the fact that things were different? Didn't they take him home and talk to him about it at that point afterwards? What did they say to him? What were his expectations around it? I am quite confused that when Jesus says, I would be in my Father's house, that Mary and Joseph don't understand. They say they didn't understand what he meant. And I find that strange because, I mean, they're the ones who had like all the angels and the shepherds and the magi and then and all that stuff and the fleeing to Egypt. Or maybe they'd blocked it out of their lives a little bit. Maybe they'd just got on with their lives. I mean, there was enough to put food on the table for a family, and living in the occupation. It was a lot. It was a lot. And then this week I've also been thinking about how actually we all live in this tension, because, remembering the prologue from John's Gospel, Jesus came that we might all be God's children. Jesus came that we might all be God's children. So how do we live with this tension in our lives? There's not going to be a set answer for anyone in particular that I can say, this is how you should do that, because everybody's families are different. Everybody's families have different grief, they have different trouble, they have different opinions, have different understandings. But it is something that we also hold in tension, like Jesus held in tension. So Jesus had to hold in tension his biological human family and the fact that he was God's child. And we also hold that tension. And what does that mean for us in our families? That we are God's child, as well as a product of our biological families and the people who brought us up. What does that mean for us? I find it reassuring that Jesus lived with that tension as well, and Jesus understands what it means to be human in a biological family, but also to know that you're God's child as well. So what does it mean for us to have God as our parent, as well as the family in which we were born and grew up? The Dibley moment of the week this week involves myself and my family at a fundraising event, and my now adult child was with me. After the dinner, we had a comedian, and the comedian was asking, what obscure characters did you ever have to play in a nativity play? My adult child put up the hand and shouted out, I was a spy. And I'm sitting there thinking, please don't say I was the vicar. Please don't say I was the vicar of that, where that nativity play was. And to be fair, they did not. They just revealed that they had been a spy in the nativity play. Well, that's it for the Dibley Diaries for this week. I pray that you and your village, however large or small, have a really blessed week as part of God's family.